Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are breaking down the Miami Dolphins 2024 offseason. We will be going over all of the departures, the acquisitions, reviewing their draft picks, and then at the very end of the video, we're going to be breaking down their 2024 schedule and giving our record prediction. So be sure to stay tuned for the entire video to see how we think the Dolphins will do in 2024. But before we do that, if you have not already, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also ring that bell to get notified when we create new content. We're coming out with videos every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We're in the middle of our off-season recap series. So go check out the videos we've done. Also to ring that bell to see when future videos come out. So Ryan, let's pull this up here. So these are the 2023 team rankings for the Miami Dolphins. Offensively was not surprised at all. Just top overall total offense and total yards and passing yards. Makes sense as well. Kind of when thinking about it, made sense a lot more just with how explosive they had in those games and that they had with Devon Chain and Raheem Mostert as well in those running games. And so I would say the stat that kind of surprised me a little bit was the sacks allowed because the offensive line wasn't really that great, in my opinion. But on top of that, though, when I thought about it more, Tua gets rid of the ball so quickly. That's their whole game plan, is to get the ball out of his hands, utilize their speed, get the ball in their playmakers, and like that made a lot more sense. I think they even improved on the offensive line, so hopefully that number keeps going down. And so defensively too, I think a very solid defense as well. They ended up having a couple of late season injuries that we'll get into here in a second. But in general, though, these numbers check out and make sense to me. Makes sense. They give up a lot more passing yards, about average passing yards. But they were in so many shootouts. Like I don't really think that's a knock on them, so to say. Particularly too, as well, I would say they're able to get after the quarterback extremely well, and so they're third in overall sacks. What was your take on the Miami Dolphins 2023 season and kind of like them coming into 24 offseason? How do you think they did, in your opinion?
Yeah, so starting off, I mean, this offense was really, really good. One of the all-time best offenses, actually, in terms of just overall production. And the way, like, they were actually very balanced as well, leading the league in passing, being sixth in rushing. I am very curious to see what Devon Achane would be able to do in this offense if he was able to stay healthy. I think he'll be a very popular fantasy pick this year. Turnovers, they did have 25 turnovers, so not a great number there, but also like at 21st, you're just ever so slightly below average. And so like with how explosive this offense was, they could definitely cover up some of those mistakes. And then honestly, I'm a little surprised with the defensive numbers. I did not think that this defense was that great personnel-wise last year. I give Vic Fangio a lot of credit. He's now in Philadelphia. And Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips as well had good seasons. Unfortunately, both of those guys, I think in week 15 or 16, went down to a torn ACL and a torn Achilles. And like that's going to be rough for this team going forward. Andrew Van Ginkel did step up and have a good year, but he's also moved on as well. And like I do agree. I think part of why this defense was successful, this team was so explosive on offense that you would have to keep up and take big risks. Like I think back to the New England game, and even though that game was 24-10, New England had multiple turnovers trying to push the ball down the field because they knew it was only a matter of time until a big play was broken with this offense. That they finally that they had to take those risks, and finally it came back to bite them. So that was the first one. The second one was not even close. I
will say too, to be a little more accurate, Jalen Phillips tore his Achilles around Thanksgiving time in that Jets game, but Bradley Chubb was week 17 where he tore his ACL. But still, those are two of their top sack leaders at the time. I think Jalen Phillips led the team in sacks with 11. Bradley Chubb led the team in sacks with 11. Jalen Phillips led the team with 6.5. And Christian Wilkins, who we'll get into here in a second, had 9 sacks for the team. And so it is one of those guys not there. The other two guys are coming off major injuries. And so how are they going to bounce back? Also, the next guy who's fifth overall in sacks for the defense was Andrew Van Ginkel, who you already mentioned, moved on as well. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they can reproduce some of those numbers And actually, I think that'd just be kind of a good segue then into the departures as well. Some guys that moved on. But yeah, Christian Wilkins, Andrew Van Ginkel as well are the two that really stick out to me. Robert Hunt moving on, going to Carolina. I think they're paying him big bucks up in Carolina. So how they replace him, he was one of the main starters that was there. Let me just double check to see his overall playing time. He did only play in half the snaps, but still, just having that good interior offensive line depth as well that you potentially move from around. So I had to see how they bounce back. In general, though, it's not the worst. I think I remember when all these big names were coming off. That in general, outside of that, losing Christian Wilkins is going to be big. But I think as we get into their acquisitions, I think we'll kind of show it's not as big of a deal with some of the people they were able to sign, especially late. But losing Chase Claypool, they replaced him. Coming back from Brandon Jones is, I don't think, as big of a loss. I would think it's not as big a loss as Deshaun Elliott, who played on 84% of their snaps. And let me see how many picks did he end up having here. But still ended up starting for 15 games of theirs. So I think that they'll be able to replace them. They are big names, and so. But I think as we get into the acquisition slide here in a second,
I do want to touch on some of the names that are still free agents really quick. I think a lot of these guys just kind of aged out. Like Xavier Howard was one; he couldn't stay healthy. Justin Houston as well. He had this was his fifth stop on his retirement tour. I think Melvin Ingram as well was another guy. Emmanuel Ogbah, Eli Apple. Just a lot of older guys that they kind of moved on from. And these were guys that gave them some quality reps, but either couldn't stay healthy or were no longer playing at the same level that they were. And the Dolphins didn't really have a ton of cap space going into free agency. So let's move on to, like you said, the free agent signings. They made a lot of signings, but I think they swapped out veterans. I think you look Odell Beckham Jr., Calais Campbell, those guys are both in their 30s, and in that veteran age as well. And then Shaq Barrett is in that same category as well. The one signing I did really like was Tyler Tart from Tennessee. I thought that was a good savvy signing. When you lose Christian Wilkins, you go get another big defensive tackle that can get after the passer. I thought that was a really good signing.
Yeah, he was from Houston.
Houston.
Yeah, but I will say one of the guys who they did also to kind of add on that, I'll go on the other side of the ball. But I think getting Aaron Brewer from Tennessee, he was a starting center for all the snaps last year. So I think getting some good, more veteran depth. Not even veteran depth, getting a starter there to help kind of solidify that offensive line, especially after losing Robert Hunt as well. That to me, I think kind of replaced some of those guys. But I like getting Odell Beckham Jr. I think he's going to fit well. One, just with the overall environment, kind of within Miami. But two, I think he's going to complement Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle really well, much more than Chase Claypool would be. To me, the name that really sticks out to me, and I had the absolute pleasure of watching him for an entire year as a Falcon, but getting Calais Campbell pretty recently, I think is going to be an absolute huge deal for this team. Calais Campbell, especially too, after Grady Jarrett went down, was the defense last year, because we lost a lot of our defense, any sort of defensive pressure once when Grady Jarrett tore his ACL against Tennessee halfway through the season. Calais Campbell still was an absolute monster last year. I think it provides a little bit of buffer to make sure that Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are fully 100% ready to go. But when they are ready to go, and then you put Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, and Calais Campbell all on the same defensive line, let alone the fact you'll still have Tyler Tart, and then you still have who was the guy? I pressed wrong thing. Zach Sealer as well, also on that defensive line. I think they can. I think they can replicate. 56 sacks is going to be a lot, but I think they can still be top 5, top 10 in overall sack production for this defense. And to your point, though, I will say it's Jordan Poyer is still one of the better safeties in the league. I know he's on the other side of
when he's on the field. Yeah.
When he's on the field, yeah. So, but I still think that you replace Deshaun Elliott there Um, I'll leave it up to obviously the experts who are able to grade these safeties much more in depth. But I like Poyer. Nothing against Deshaun Elliott, but I think at minimum you'll get the same production as well. And go ahead.
He's a good player. He's going to be like 34 this year. And if these guys start on this defense, I mean, Calais Campbell's going to be 38. You have Poyer who's going to be like 33 or 34. Like, they have a lot of older guys on this defense that is, to me, concerning, especially when your younger guys are coming off a torn ACL and a torn Achilles, which are two injuries that are notorious for reducing explosiveness and being hard to come back from.
Well, let's put it in perspective, though, where Miami is at. Like, Miami is in a we need to win right now situation.
Fair.
So even if it is just for 1 year, but it pans out, they'll take that. I'm a Falcons fan. Trust me, I'll take 10 horrible seasons if it means one season with the Super Bowl. And I think especially to the people down in Miami, I think they're having it's a fun team to watch. And I think they're bringing in a lot of good guys that are here. And I think they're kind of addressing the weaknesses. Like, they got a consistent third receiver, I think, that can complement Hill and Waddle well. And Odell Beckham, yes, he's a little bit older. I think Jonnu Smith is actually going to be an interesting player as well to kind of add on to that team as well. Still pretty versatile. He's also a former Falcon as well. Aaron Brewer's going to beef up that interior offensive line. Shaq Barrett is still there. You got also Anthony Walker coming over from Cleveland. I still think these are some guys that we've seen some solid minutes over the past season or so that I think can come in and help contribute and at minimum provide good depth. And I think if you go look at Mike McDaniel and what he can do, especially offensively, I think it'll be very interesting what he can put together. And defensively, I know it was a big shock, as we've already talked about, losing Christian Wilkins, but I believe that they've replaced him in Calais Campbell and then some. I mean, Calais Campbell is older. I mean, shoot, how old is Calais Campbell now? 38?
He'll be 38, on September 1st.
He's still probably going to be one of the better players on the field. It's just going to be if he can stay healthy, because he's so big. Like he said, when we were at the Hall of Fame a couple weeks ago for our cousin's wedding, there's an old video of Calais Campbell talking on the sideline when he's still a Raven. And he's literally head and shoulders taller than his teammates. And his teammates are like 6'2". The dude is just massive. And so I think he's going to create so many great one-on-one matchups for Bradley Chubb, for Jalen Phillips, for all these, for Shaq Barrett.
Chop Robinson.
For Chop Robinson as well. We haven't even talked about that yet. For Zach Sealer, especially once those guys get healthy, it's going to be very interesting, I think, how they put this together. And with the way the Dolphins want to play, which is they want to win in a track meet, almost literally a track meet. They just want to go race everybody. I think this is going to be the defensive front that you want. There's going to be the defensive front. Calais Campbell is going to be the guy that you want to put that you're going to want to put in there.
Well, and I think that's a good segue into their draft. So they got Chop Robinson, a very explosive pass rusher. I wasn't as high on him just because of some of his measurables and performance against some of the higher end Big Ten competition. But then Patrick Paul, Jalen Wright, I think both of those guys have roles in this offense. And then you go look, Muhammad Kamara was one of the most explosive edge rushers in college football. He was at Colorado State. He's just slightly undersized at 6'1", 6'2", 248 or something like that. So a little bit small. But again, one of the things that was so nice about this defense last year was just this offense was so explosive. These edge rushers could pin their ears back and really get after the quarterback, which was part of the reason why I think they went which is part of the reason why I think they got, 56 sacks. Mm-hmm. And it, to me, I think a large part just has to do with this offense being able to put up so many points that other teams, they have to keep up. And that is a edge rusher's wet dream right there. So but again, these are two young guys. They haven't done anything in the NFL yet. The guys that they brought in are, I think, older veterans who can play well when healthy. And we'll see how Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb do in their recovery and coming back this year. So with that said, let's get into their depth chart, because I think on offense, there's not a whole lot to talk about. I think the top 3 receivers are pretty clear. You have Jalen Waddle, Odell Beckham, Tyreek Hill. But after that, there's a pretty big drop-off. You have Eric Ezukama, River Crawcraft, and Braxton Berrios as like the second 3 receivers. So I think kind of like last year, well, after Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill got hurt, there really wasn't not – this offense fell off pretty hard in the second half of the year because both those guys were banged up. And then you look, Teron Armstead, still the left tackle, Isaiah Wynn, left guard. Aaron Brewer slots in as that starting center, as you mentioned. Austin Jackson at right guard. And then, Robert Jones at right guard, and then Austin Jackson at right tackle. And so I'm really curious just to kind of see how this offensive line shakes out because they did lose a few pieces. Or I guess mainly Robert Hunt, but just see how that kind of fills in and what they're able to do. And if they can keep Tua clean again, because that was a big deal 2 seasons ago.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, to your point, going back to the receivers real quick. Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill had 1,800 receiving yards. Yeah. Jalen Waddle had just over 1,000, playing only 14 games last season. And then the next guy was Durham Smythe with 366 receiving yards. And so I agree with you. And I think that's kind of one of the things I'm very curious on watching just as a whole with this Miami team through training camp and then just throughout the season. Because obviously we know like they can just outrun teams. They can absolutely just run them off the field. But it's almost kind of had the San Francisco effect a little bit. And my concern with San Francisco is it's like they have obviously some of the top receivers in the league. One of the you can make an argument for one of the top quarterbacks or top offensive systems. Let's put it that way. But then when one of those guys goes down, that system's not built for the backups. Like there's not too much of a fallback for them to go to. So I'd be curious if how they try to implement a more just well-rounded offense in case if Tyreek Hill does get hurt and he has to miss a game, or Jalen Waddle gets hurt and he missed a couple of games last year, that somebody could come in and obviously they can't be Jalen Waddle, but there's still offensive scheming available and offensive play calls that they can go to, which are going to be a little bit more traditional on how guys can get over. It's kind of, I don't know if that's a weird thing to say. Leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts, because I just think that's what I look at when I look at Miami is like they are boom or bust, because it's got to be Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or maybe something explosive out of the running game, just because those guys are also crazy explosive. But that's just kind of my concern with them is if they can't win this way, how else are they going to win games?
Yeah. Well, and another thing we saw too, so like at the beginning of the season when they were scoring 70 against the Broncos, they had that new offensive motion where they were like putting Tyreek Hill in motion in the slot, but like out wide.
Mm-hmm.
So he basically would just get a running head start, and then he would just blow by everybody when he would get to the sideline. Once when teams kind of figured that out, he also did get injured. And then when he came back, it just wasn't nearly as effective as it was early on in the season. So it'll just kind of be interesting to see like what new things will they create on the offensive side of the ball in terms of motions and shifts. And I'm sure Mike McDaniel has tons of things that he can go to. But then, like you said, how do they work Odell in? Do they have more of a role for some of the guys behind their top 3 receivers? And the last thing I'll say before we can move on to the defensive depth chart is I think it's more of an if not when Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill get those like nagging injuries, because we saw it the last 2 or 3 seasons with both of them where they're not tearing ACLs, they're not rupturing Achilles, but like they're pulling hamstrings. Tyreek Hill had the shoulder issue, he had the collarbone issue in Kansas City, and then he had the ankle issue last year in Miami when he got rolled up on weird. And so, like, to me, it's more of an if not when, especially with how these guys play. And then it's how long are they out for, and can they be back in time for significant?
Well, and that goes to the storyline that I'm really curious about. And you might have mentioned this a little bit because you mentioned a little bit on the receiving room, but just how Taj Washington and Malik Washington, 2 guys that, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering correctly, are burners. Like they're quick guys. Like they want to be in the track meet as well. And so where do they fit into this roster? And like, are they going to probably make a roster spot because of that instance right there. It just have him on his backups, or essentially if they just want to go 4 receiver set, it's have everybody just run 4 verts or whatnot, just because they're all quicker than everybody else on the field. I think that's where how do they develop throughout this training camp? Do they make the roster, or are they practice squad guy in case if somebody does get hurt? I think that'll be very interesting.
Taj
go ahead.
Taj Washington was more of like a separating route runner, and he had like short area burst with some top end speed. Whereas I think Malik Washington, actually, he was like 5'9", 195, I believe, and he was actually more of like a yards after catch threat. Like Virginia with Malik Washington did a lot of like screenplays, a lot of jet sweeps. They did a lot of things to, like, get the ball in his hand without actually having him like run true traditional routes. And so yeah. But he also, Virginia didn't have a great quarterback. Taj Washington was at USC with Caleb Williams. So a little different quarterback level there.
Yeah.
So,
but I think that's fair to watch. I think defensively, though, I think the biggest thing to watch to me is kind of how quickly Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb can come back. Because even for me looking at this right now, I do think Kendall Fuller is going to slide in there. At least it's going to be good secondary battle for the number 2 cornerback spot with him and Cam Smith, who they drafted last year. Dalen Ramsey and Javon Holland, I think, are good as well. I think Jordan Poyer is going to slide in there perfectly as that strong safety for them and bringing that veteran leadership. And then defensive line-wise, I think I can just imagine, because they have Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb as outside linebackers. They're like the modern-day edge rushers now. I just imagine a defensive line with Zach Sealer, Calais Campbell as the defensive tackles, and then you have on the defensive ends, and then the modern day outside linebacker edge rushers of Chubb and Jalen Phillips outside of them. I mean, that just seems terrifying. Or if you have Tier Tartan there instead of Zach, or vice versa, and then seeing how Chop Robinson develops, because I also think too that's going to really fit his play style as well. With like if Calais Campbell's bringing so much attention, let him use his speed on the outside, just very similarly to how Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb work. So I think kind of how this defensive line shifts up, that's the main storyline to me. But I think everything else, though, I'd be terrified of this defense if this is what it was on week 1.
Yeah, I mean, I am a little curious to see what it shapes up to be. And to me, I'm holding my breath on Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb being like truly ready to go and back into form this season, just because we've seen those injuries before. Players might come back and be healthy, but it takes them a little while to get back to what they actually were before the injury, especially the torn Achilles. That is a really tough one to come back from. Yeah. And then I think for me, the secondary, there's not a lot of names here that I like. I mean, the only one is Javon Holland that I think is playing in his prime at a high level right now. Jordan Poyer, like we said, 34. Kendall Fuller, very similar situation. He was in one of the worst secondaries last year in Washington. Jalen Ramsey is there, but wasn't nearly as good last year as he had been in past years, and seems to be on a decline. Also a 31, 32-year-old corner. Yeah. And so like I'm a little concerned here. Cam Smith, I don't know really too much about his production last year, but I know Xavier Howard, who was in and out of the lineup, and Jalen Ramsey were playing over him. So
yeah,
that to me is another storyline to follow. I just think this secondary has a lot of question marks. And then on top of all of that, they all learned the Vic Fangio system last year. Vic Fangio is now in Philadelphia. He's gone. And somebody else is, I don't know the name off the top of my head, who's in Miami now.
I'll look it up here.
Anthony Weaver, who I am unsure of. So,
former Ravens assistant head coach. So that's good. So I get your point about the age thing, but I still think, especially to Jordan Poyer, I mean, you go look at what that – now the defense was in Buffalo, they had a really good front seven. And so, but everybody was dropping like flies left and right last year, except for Poyer. Pretty sure Poyer played a majority of the games last year.
I'm not sure. I thought they both went down. Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde both went down.
Either way, though, I still like his overall production and the leadership that he's going to bring as well, especially from that strong safety position. He's going to be a great communicator, I think, to everybody throughout that middle part of the defense, making sure everybody's in their right spot. I understand, like, if they would have signed a long-term contract with them, I would agree. Like, I wouldn't want to do that at all. But I think still this secondary, I think it's going to be – I think it would be at worst average, just thanks to also to just how good that defensive front is going to be this year.
So Jordan Poyer played in 16 games last year, which was more than I thought. I still just at that age, I don't know. This secondary just has to be average if this pass rush can be what their potential is.
Yeah.
So
I understand what you mean. And so
yeah, let's move on to their 2024 schedule. Starting off fairly tough schedule. So Jacksonville, Buffalo, at Seattle, then Tennessee on Monday Night Football, at New England, and then they have an early Week 6 bye. For this team, I hate the fact that they have a Week 6 bye, especially with how they have finished the last 2 years with some pretty. They kind of limped to the end of the regular season, and having a Week 6 bye, I think, it will kind of exacerbate that issue over the last 13 weeks.
Yeah.
So Jacksonville, Buffalo, I think those are two teams that are going to be contending for the top of their division. They're going to be contending for a top wildcard spot. I do think they probably will win one or two of those. Buffalo has had their number lately. At Seattle, could be a tough matchup. Tennessee and New England, though, they should win. So I think 2-3, 3-2 is kind of the range that they'll come out of this one in.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit of a tough opener, not the worst, not as bad as it's going to be to finish, and we'll get that here in a second. But in general, though, yeah, I think Jacksonville is going to be a good litmus test, but I think that they can have their number there. Buffalo is going to be a fun one to watch for Thursday Night Football. Seattle, I have no idea with Seattle because they have a new head coach coming in. It will be at Seattle, but that will be a fun one to watch, though, as they're going up against Devin Witherspoon and is it Reek Woolen? Yeah. So that'll be a fun little matchup there. Tennessee beat them last year, and then New England, I think, is a division matchup, so it can also go either way.
Yeah, well, New England hasn't beaten Tua. They've beaten the Dolphins in the last 3 or 4 years, but they haven't beaten Tua in the last 3 or 4 years because when Tua's been hurt, they've beat them every time.
I got you. So I will say, not the worst start for them. But then Week 7 at Indy, hosting Arizona, at Buffalo, at Los Angeles for Monday Night Football, and then the Raiders, and then New England. Couple of tough games there, but to me, their schedule doesn't really start though until Week 13 and beyond. Because I look at those next 18 games. Caveat with the Jets, just because don't know how good they're going to be, because there's still a lot of question marks with them. But if it's just like how we thought 2023 was going to be for them at this point of the year, getting Aaron Rodgers and everything, and their offensive line is much improved, I think that's going to be a very interesting matchup, and them playing them twice in the final 5 weeks, it looks like it is going to be interesting. So I think those final 6 games for them are going to be tough, and we'll get to those final 4 in a second here. But not the toughest. A couple of medium matched games, I would say, mixed in between a couple of tough ones with Buffalo and the Los Angeles Rams Week 9 and 10. But I think Week 7, 8, 11, and 12 are absolutely doable for them. I think they come out with a winning record. It just depends on how they match up against the more playoff-ready caliber teams.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Green Bay on a short week, Green Bay has a lot of talent as well. They're probably the best. They really were the best team in the NFL at the end of last season. I think they just got unlucky. A few bounces didn't go their way in the playoffs, and San Francisco ended up winning. So that'll be interesting. But then just to close it out here with the final 4 games at Houston, San Francisco, at Cleveland on Sunday Night Football, and then at the Jets. Again, with the caveat on the Jets, if they're as good as we think they could be, that's going to be a really tough matchup. But Houston is just absolutely star-studded. San Francisco is San Francisco. And then Cleveland had one of the best defenses in the league last year. And maybe this is the year they finally get Deshaun Watson right. But even then, with Joe Flacco, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, David Njoku is a very talented offensive weapons. And so that's a tough matchup for anybody.
Yeah. No, that's going to be very interesting. And that's what I think, too, is, and I even mentioned the caveats of, like, the Jets, but it's like, caveat those, like, what are the Dolphins going to be like? Like, are they going to be able to stay healthy? Because really the biggest thing, like, you need Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to stay healthy. That's pretty much what their offense has been. They've been running the ball better, and they have some explosive guys that really fit their system really well. But if one of those guys goes down, I mean, that's half of their passing offense essentially.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting here. They're not going to have any boring games. I could say that. Even if they blow a team out, they're going to put 70 points up on them. And so it's not going to be boring at all. So it's going to be fun to watch. I think that it kind of leads into my record, and I hated doing this because I ended up changing it because I don't know who's going to win this division. But I do think the division is going to come down to Miami and Buffalo again. So spoiler alert for when the Buffalo video comes out tomorrow. But I also put Buffalo at 10-7. And I just look at it. I think Miami's going to win. I think they're going to beat Jacksonville, Seattle, Tennessee, New England twice. And then probably against Las Vegas, Arizona, and Indiana as well. So I guess that's at 8 wins there. But I don't favor them against Houston or San Francisco. I think Cleveland could be a toss-up. The Jets, if they're the team that we thought. And then Buffalo as well. Buffalo's kind of had their number. Buffalo's had their number, I guess, later on in the season when they played.
Yeah.
But I guess early on in the season, who knows? Maybe they can take advantage of that. But I think that's where I think that 10-7 range for them, I think it's going to be just like what the AFC has been the past couple of years, because there's so many great teams where they're going to have a weaker record because of it, like at 10-7, because everybody just keeps beating one another. And so not too many teams can go out and separate maybe one or two, like how Baltimore did last year. But I think Miami's going to be right there in the middle. I think they're going to be fighting for the division. I think they're good enough to at least be a wild card spot.
Yeah.
And so it's can they win a couple of these games? Can they beat Buffalo when they need to? Can they potentially beat Cleveland? Jump over Houston, with this new lineup here, and so that's just going to be the questions if they can do that.
Yeah, and so if you can't tell throughout this entire video, I do think the Dolphins have regressed slightly. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle are really the only two key producers in that passing offense. And once when they went down, this offense really struggled. Odell Beckham played 14 or 15 games last year and only caught 565 yards in I don't want to say a target-heavy Ravens offense, but that was the most the Ravens have ever thrown under the Lamar Jackson era. And, at least it felt that way. And they were very efficient at it, and it still just didn't really feel like the ball was finding Odell Beckham all that much. So maybe it was a scheme thing. Maybe it was the fact he didn't play in 2022. But all in all, I like the signing as the name. But how it translates on the field, I have some questions. Also, I have a lot of concerns about this defense. This defense is extremely old, and that usually doesn't translate into production. And I know Calais Campbell seems to be defying time. Jordan Poyer had a decent year last year. And so with all that said, I just think the Dolphins, they're going to be 10-7 because I think they'll probably have a hot start like they usually do. They'll probably go – I said 3-2 in that first stretch. They'll probably go 4-1. I think the only team that really will threaten them will be the Bills on that Thursday night game. And that is only because the Bills seem to always have their number. But from then on, I largely think they'll probably be a 500 or so team because even that back half of the first or of the middle stretch that we talked about on the last slide, like there's a few really tough games at the end of that one. And so this is going to be a really interesting team because I know I just said all that. If they get home field advantage and they can run the way that they want to and not play in record cold temperatures, they can beat anybody when healthy.
Yeah.
So,
well, and to your point too, if you have a northern team going down to South Beach in January where they're used to 0 degrees, but then it's 70, that could be kind of almost that like September effect potentially. But I want to rebuttal your point about Odell Beckham Jr. here, and he did. Odell Beckham for Baltimore played in 14 games, only started in 6, and I think he was a little banged up. So maybe they were trying to watch his numbers there. Baltimore overall, according to Pro Football Reference, was 21st in overall team passing yards at 3,635. That does include sack numbers as well, so that's why it's a little bit off. He did lead the team in yards per reception. He had 35 catches for 565 yards. I think and that's in that Baltimore Ravens offense, which you're correct. They pass the ball a lot more for Baltimore, which is still not really that much. I mean, I still think Lamar Jackson only had 3,600 passing yards, only threw the ball. Well, I don't know actually if that is a lot. 457 times. How many times? Yeah. So they had the third fewest pass attempts throughout the entire league last year. So I think, and Miami was, they had to be up here in the top. Am I just missing them? Miami was 20th at 566, but there was 70 more pass attempts, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to start every game, but he is going to have an active presence within that offense. I think there's going to be a lot more targets coming his way. I think he can easily get 600 more yards, be the third ranked receiver on Miami, if not potentially even push up to 700 or 800, depending on how much playing time he gets. So I think he's going to help bring in a lot more of those numbers, a lot more than whatever Chase Claypool or Robbie Chosen Anderson.
The metal rule piece of the NFL. No, and I agree. He's an upgrade over what they had, but it's still just I don't want to say it's a lateral move because it is an upgrade, but it's not like a big upgrade.
Well, it's kind of been my theme of this entire offseason recap is it is a win now move.
Yeah, it is for sure.
If they're New England, who's rebuilding their team, maybe they re-sign Odell Beckham just so there's a veteran receiver, but it's a one and done type deal.
Yeah.
They are in a win now mode. Odell wants to play one more season, or I guess he wants one more Super Bowl. And so then he'll probably hang it up, or maybe not. I don't know. If someone threw $20 million at me, I'd probably keep playing as well. But if anybody's out there, who has $20 million lying around, but I think they're in a win now mood. Even then, too, getting Calais Campbell back. I mean, what is he doing? Well, I take that back. He's still one of the best defensive ends in the league, but just because of what he brings to the table. But he's 38. Like all these moves are just win now moves. So I get your point about they're on the other side of 30, but honestly, if they don't make the playoffs this year, my prediction now, hot take, Tua's gone. They're gonna trade off all these guys here and try and get drafted.
Just extend Tua?
No, they might have just extended Tua. So never mind.
Oh no, they haven't. They're just in.
They're in contract negotiations.
Yeah, they're in negotiations. I've seen a lot of reports on it. But
that's interesting though too because Trevor Lawrence just got $275 million and I don't want to give Tua that much money. I don't want to make him the top paid quarterback in the league.
Well, and we could make a whole video on whether the Dolphins should extend Tua or not because I have my own feelings about it. But it is an interesting debacle because he didn't really ever produce, and then he got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and then his production went through the roof. But then now we can kind of see when they're not on the field, his production dips significantly.
He has limited capabilities as an NFL quarterback. He's great in the college system or whatnot, but a lot of the offense is get the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. And that being said, you got to be accurate. You got to be able to facilitate. You got to be able to read the defense. But it is there's a big difference between Patrick Mahomes throwing Tyreek Hill the ball in that offensive system than Tua throwing the ball to him in that offense.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And so that to me, I think if they don't make the playoffs, then yeah, I think you have that discussion. If they do make the playoffs, then I think maybe you extend him and whatnot. But one of the points I wanted to make that I don't think I got to was if this team wins the division, I really think that they could go and be in the AFC title game. If they're a wild card team, I think they're bounced in the first round, because if they're not playing at home, this team is not good in January unless they go to like a Houston or something. Yeah.
Unless they go to Houston, unless they go to Los Angeles or Jacksonville.
Well, they're not going to go to Los Angeles. Oh, I guess. Well, they could go to the Chargers, but
the Chargers. Yeah. And so Vegas is another one. If they have to stay below the Mason-Dixon line, essentially.
Yeah. So, I mean, all in all, I think the Dolphins, they're a contender this year for sure. They made moves to contend this year, but I have questions about those moves. You have less questions. So we'll just kind of have to see how it plays out. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Miami Dolphins offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? And on that, we will see you guys next time.